We've got a massive contradiction literally hiding right beneath our feet. On one hand, you have folks sounding the alarm, saying non-native earthworms are this huge invasive threat, just destroying our forests. But then, on the other hand, organic gardeners treat these exact same worms as the absolute gold standard for soil health and regeneration. So how can both of these things possibly be true at the same time? Welcome to The Explainer. Let's dive into this.
I mean, can earthworms really destroy an ecosystem? It feels kind of absurd to even ask, right? I think we've all been taught since we were kids that earthworms are the ultimate heroes of the dirt, just dutifully churning the earth and helping plants grow. But what if I told you that in certain places, these little wrigglers are actually causing rapid, devastating ecological collapse?
And that right there perfectly illustrates the paradox we're looking at today. In one environment, earthworms are acting as literal forest destroyers, eating away the very foundation of ancient woodlands. But in another, they are absolute garden regenerators. They're supercharging compost bins and turning our old kitchen waste into incredible fertility. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack the science and figure out exactly what the heck is going on.
Section 1. The Earthworm Paradox. Defining the science.
Okay, so to untangle this whole web, we really have to look closely at the official USDA definition of an invasive species. Now, it has to be a non-native species, sure, but its introduction also has to cause economic, environmental, or human harm. Just because a species is non-native simply means it wasn't here originally. It definitely doesn't automatically mean it's invasive or inherently bad. And you know that distinction? That's going to be absolutely crucial to solving our paradox today.
Section 2. America's Glacial Reset. The truth about native worms.
You hear a lot of really well-meaning people say they only want to raise native worms, to protect the environment, which sounds great, but historically speaking, that's actually almost biologically impossible. See, millennia ago, during the last ice age, massive glaciers actually wiped out native worms entirely. We're talking essentially everywhere north of roughly the Ohio River and up into the Pacific Northwest. The ecological baseline was totally reset. Fast forward to about 400 years ago, and European species hitchhiked over with colonial settlers, mostly in ship ballasts and plant soil. And today, those European worms completely dominate Midwestern and Northeastern gardens. So, if you're holding out for native worms to magically show up in your Ohio or Minnesota garden, well, you're going to be waiting a very, very long time.
Section 3. The Forest Invasion, where the danger lies.
Now, while your backyard is one thing, there is a very real invasive earthworm story playing out right now in North American woodlands. And to understand the danger, we really need to understand something called the duff. Basically, this is the thick, spongy, slowly decomposing layer of organic matter that just sits on an old-growth forest floor. Because those pristine upper Midwest forests actually evolved without worms for thousands of years, this duff layer just built up undisturbed. It became this incredibly vital nursery for native wildflowers, ferns, tree seedlings. It's a super delicate, completely worm-free ecosystem.
So, the million-dollar question, what happens when you drop hungry, non-native European earthworms right into that pristine environment? Well, rapid ecological collapse. When worms are introduced to these old-growth forests, they chew through that precious duff layer incredibly fast. Literally decades of carbon storage, native seed banks, and critical habitat are just devoured in a matter of years. The native wildflowers can't bounce back, and the entire soil ecology just collapses. So yeah, the fear you hear from environmentalists, it is completely valid. No doubt about it.
Section 4. The gardener's best friend, the magic of managed systems.
But let's flip the script for a second, because context changes absolutely everything. You see, the exact same thing that destroys an untouched forest is exactly what supercharges an agricultural space. Red wigglers, which are native to Europe, they act like these biological processing machines. They churn your leftover food waste into castings that are just loaded with plant-available nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Plus, they pack the soil with beneficial bacteria, fungi, protozoa, the whole shebang. Even the common nightcrawler creates these vertical burrows that act as essential drainage channels and literally become highways for your plant's root growth. In a managed garden, they're building functionally richer soil right before your eyes.
I absolutely love this quote from our source material. The chemistry doesn't care about biogeography. It's so true. Plants have been evolving to partner with these biological processes, this amazing soil microbiome, for hundreds of millions of years. The soil in your managed garden bed doesn't just suddenly stop benefiting from aeration and nutrients simply because your worm's ancestors hitched a ride from Europe 400 years ago.
Section 5. Context is everything. Resolving the paradox.
So how in the world do we reconcile the forest destroyer with the garden regenerator?
Well, think about free-roaming cats versus indoor cats. Every single domestic cat in North America is technically an invasive species. They're descended from African wildcats. Now, nobody looks at their cozy house cat and thinks of it as an ecological terror. But what happens when we change the context from indoors to outdoors?
1.3 to 4 billion. That is the staggering estimated number of birds killed annually by free-roaming cats in the U.S. alone. And if you add in up to 22 billion small mammals, that is genuinely catastrophic for native wildlife. It's a perfect example proving that an unmanaged, non-native species can absolutely devastate an environment.
So the ultimate takeaway here is that harm is entirely context-dependent. We don't look at an indoor cat and call it an invasive threat, right? Because in a managed confined environment, it's just a harmless companion. Earthworms are exactly the same way. A red wiggler loose in a pristine Minnesota old-growth forest? That's a serious problem. But that exact same red wiggler confined to your backyard compost bin, just munching on your kitchen scraps, that's a super helpful creature doing its job. The species itself isn't inherently bad. Your management is what makes all the difference.
Section 6. Responsible worm farming. Stewardship in action.
Since we know management is the key here, how do we actually make sure we're protecting our forests? Well, here are 3 really simple, science-backed steps you can take today to be a responsible steward. Step 1. Never ever dump leftover bait worms. Seriously, just one single bucket dumped by an angler can seed an entire forest floor, so take them home instead. Step 2. Keep your compost bins well fed. Worms follow the food, so if they have plenty of kitchen scraps, they have literally zero reason to migrate out of your yard. And Step 3. Clean your boots. Worm cocoons are tiny, they're sticky, and they are incredibly resilient, so just scrub them off your gardening shoes before you go for a hike, so you don't accidentally track them into protected woodlands. These are super low-effort habits, but they have a massive ecological impact.
Now, I do want to make one quick but very important caveat before we wrap up, and that is the Asian jumping worm exception. While European compost worms are fantastic in managed systems and they're highly controllable, the Asian jumping worm is a completely different story. It is a truly destructive, highly invasive species everywhere it goes. You absolutely do not want to introduce it to your garden. That is a fascinating and really urgent topic that honestly requires its own explainer down the line.
Which brings us to our final question. Will you harness the power of worms responsibly? Remember, non-native doesn't always mean bad. Earthworms aren't just invaders, and they aren't just heroes either. They are incredibly powerful tools, and if we stop blindly fearing them and start managing them with precision and care, we can build incredible regenerative soil right in our own backyards, all while keeping our ancient forests completely safe. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.